I understand what you're saying, but Yeshua of Nazareth had one God, and it was his Father.
Yes, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And he not only said that his Father was the only true Elohim.
No, well, he wouldn't have said that in John.
No, because it was written in Koine Greek.
Right.
But what he was saying, regardless of what language it was in, he was saying that his Father was the one and only true God. Because I'm speaking it in English now, but
again, it's that concept of true.
It's the concept of what?
It's that concept of true and what that means.
I think it means
that he's truthful, that he's the
no, not truthful,
the correct one.
True, genuine, only, because he's only talking to one.
Is that how you would gloss the Greek?
Pardon?
Is that how you would gloss the Greek or translate that?
I think I'm trying anyway to be very, very clear of what I'm saying and what I understand. Is that there's only one that is legitimately the only true and supreme, existent, mighty one. Because Yeshua, he wasn't a god in the sense of being a deity. Because he said, this is after his resurrection also. It wasn't until after he was resurrected that he said, all power and authority has been given unto me. Well, nobody had to give it to Yahweh because it was innately and always his. And anyone that is a mighty one, which is Elohim, they are an Elohim not because of deity, but because Yahweh has conferred power and authority upon them to fulfill.
So what's the difference between that and the deity?
Deity, there's only one. A deity is one that is a spiritual being that has always existed, is supreme in power and authority, and is the one creator of everything, the one and only. One and only. And you go back to Deuteronomy, and Yahweh is saying, that he was saying that there are, how did he say this? Let me stop and think. I am tired. I don't know if I don't know if I've mentioned this to Alan, but I didn't even get 2 hours sleep last night.
Oh, wow.
But he said that I am Elohim of Elohim. Now there's many Elohim, and of course that's what David said in the Psalms. That you shall, how did he say it again? I may be getting too tired. That you are gods, but you shall die like men. And of course, Paul, where was that? That was 1 Corinthians 8. He said, but to us, meaning the believers of the church in Corinth that he pioneered, but to us, there is but one God, the Father. And then he goes on and he said, and one Messiah. So he's making a very clear distinction. And he said that talking about food offered unto idols, he said, there is in the world gods many and lords many, but to us, there is but one God, the Father.
Okay, let's look at this.
Yes, right,
one.
but that would be, that's not identifying that he's the only God.
In fact, it says the exact opposite.
It's saying the exact opposite of that.
I think it's very clear because Yahweh says he is the Elohim of Elohim.
Yes, that would be,
he's
the God of gods. Yeah, he's the God of gods. He's the Lord of lords,
yes,
the King of kings. So the issue there, Shelley, just before I let Alan, the issue there, though, is that if he is making these identity statements as being, I am the King of kings, Lord of lords, and God of gods, if there aren't any other lords, kings, or gods, what is he actually saying?
I will tell you then, because this is partly of what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 8. There are many that he has given power and authority to, which is what makes them gods or masters in certain respects. It's only because of power and authority that he has granted them. That is what makes them gods or Elohim, not because they were some supernatural, because they're of the same status as the Father, who alone is the only true one.
Yeah,
Nobody gave it to them.
Yeah, so I'll let Alan interject, and then I have another question. Go ahead, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so where is the actual difference in the being, whether they have their power from God or innate in themselves? But where do we see the text or Jesus or anyone else making that distinction? It's not in the word the one true God, because he's not saying that God is only these things.
I'm not sure I understand you, Alan.
Sure. So what I mean is, we have them being designated by the same word, right?
Elohim, but there's only one in the entire.
Wait, there's not only one. Elohim itself does not. You gave a definition earlier.
I didn't finish, but I'll wait for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm saying you gave a definition of Elohim earlier. That's not actually in any of the texts or any of the lexicon. There's not a difference in that. And Elohim or an El or any of the other terms for that is a deity, a divine being, or God. Where we find the difference is in their actual role and position. So just as you and I and Travis and everyone here are human beings, but I've done sales, we have missionaries, we're not all the same role, but we're the same being.
Mm-hmm. But one is an uncreated being, and all the rest.
Where do we find that distinction, though?
Well, Yahweh says it's in Isaiah 42, I believe, 42 or 47. He said that he was alone. He said, "I stretched out the heavens. I was alone when I did this. I alone did this." Alone is there's nobody around. Everything that came to be came because he spoke it into existence. Even these that was later, they're spiritual beings, but they're created spiritual beings to whom he gave power and authority to fulfill his will and the role that he wanted them to fulfill in his plan throughout the universe and in the world. Yeah. But no one created him.
Well, let's assume for a moment that this distinction holds, and that nothing else was in existence before it was created. There's other texts in the Torah that completely contradict that. But here's what I'd like you to kind of look at. Is there anywhere where we can find in the text that if you are a created being, you're not a god?
You are an Elohim because you have been given. You're a spiritual being, and at that time, you are a spiritual being, but you don't have any power and authority of your own. It is only given to you by the one who is the supreme.
Okay, but
and it is only to fulfill his purpose.
Okay, but where do we find that changes you into not a god or makes a difference there for what we're talking about?
Well, some of these gods that we're talking about, and I'm sure you might know who I'm referring to, when people would be in the presence of these mighty ones, of course, angels were called gods. They were called Elohim, judges of Israel, prophets. It could be just magistrates, of any kind of.
Do you know when that interpretation comes into being and why?
Because these people are in a position to where they have authority and power that what they say is to be carried out, or else there would be consequences. And when you have these beings that show up in the presence of mortal humans, their understanding is that I'm in the presence of someone superior to me. And a lot of times we read about how they basically bow down and they're starting to worship these things. And they say, no, don't do that. worship God. Now, if they were gods, they would accept it. They wouldn't say, no, don't do that. Worship God, meaning the one that is God.
Well, the thing with the judges, what I'm getting at here is that we don't find that applied to judges in everyday matters. We don't find that applied to judges. We only start to get that interpretation from the school of the 2nd century sage, Rabbi Ishmael. And we find that being applied to judges in the interpretation because they are like the divine beings in God's heavenly retinue that are judges. So that's a much later understanding. It wasn't during the time of Jesus.
Well, I think it was
during the time. Right, but I'm saying if we're trying to understand what gods were, that's not one that you can use to say that they're not actual divine beings.
And are you saying that the Yahweh is creating these divine beings?
Absolutely.
He's creating these other Elohim?
They did not exist on their own. They did not always exist. They had a point at which they were created, but there is one uncreated being, that is the Father, that is Yahweh, who spoke everything into existence, and who said he was alone when he did it.
Where does he say that he was alone when he did it?
This is either Isaiah, it's in the 40s. I want to say around Isaiah 42 or 44, those chapters.
So Isaiah 42:5 says, Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth.
I'm alone.
It doesn't say I'm alone, though.
Well, in the KJV it does.
This is the NRSV.
It's what?
This is the NRSV. The New Revised Standard Version.
Okay, I'm just not familiar with it.
It's considered a more scholarly translation. It's what most biblical scholars utilize.
Still going off of the KJV, though.
It could well be. I'm not disputing that, but I use the KJV primarily because that's what James Strong's concordance is keyed to.
Right.
Don't use Strong's.
Yeah, Strong's is incredibly outdated.
Well, I hope to get a Strong's.
But not Strong's.
Yeah. Well, I have an Englishman's, which is for the Greek, but I hope to get
in 42:5 it says, Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people upon it. And I'm wondering how you reconcile that with, if that's true, and I assume that you agree with the New Testament, or do you have issues with the New Testament?
Oh, no, not at all.
Well, so in Colossians 1, beginning at verse 15, referring to Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, or the unseen God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or powers or rulers. All things have been created through him and for him. So is this talking about Jesus and his pre-incarnate state?
No.
Participating in creation?
No.
What's it talking about then? Because that's how it's traditionally understood.
Traditionally, yes, I understand, but I am absolutely a-traditional.
So how are you? How are you reconciling those two verses?
Right, very easily. Are you familiar with a term, a concept called prolepsis?
No.
Okay, prolepsis. It means to, and Yahweh says that he does this. He spells it right out for us himself in the Tanakh, that he speaks of things that are not yet, as though they actually, at that present time, exist. Because he can do that because he has the foreknowledge, like looking down through a corridor of time. He was going to have a son. And this is the prophecy also. Speaking of things that are not yet as though they are, because they are certain. They will happen. He has decreed them. It's just they haven't happened yet.
I don't understand how that concept reconciles the issue.
Okay, because if you're going to build a house, generally now, the best way to build a house is you have an architect that draws up a blueprint. And that's what you make your house from. So all things that were created, now I want you to take that concept and apply it to Yeshua. Because it says that Yeshua, who was born of a virgin in the fullness of time, how does it say it? When the fullness of time had come, Yeshua was born of a woman made under the law. So what it means is when the time was right, Yeshua was born of a virgin. He was conceived in her womb, and he gestated there, and he was born. And he was born during a time in a nation that was under practicing the law. But it was when the fullness of time had come. But it wasn't his time for those things to happen before. But he was the blueprint by which Yahweh created everything, because he spoke everything into existence for this son that he was going to one day have. Everything was created with him in mind and for him. Like a man, like my landlord, Mr. Franson. He started out when he was in his 20s, and he had this vision, and he was going to build apartment complexes, and he was going to be this big landlord, and he was going to provide housing for people, and he did this here. I don't know how many he has now, but he did it all. He benefited, yes, but ultimately, so that when he's gone, there's a legacy that he's leaving his family. All of his family members work for him. This has become a big deal operation. And when he's gone, this will provide income and steady and a reliable income for his family for generations to come. They can just keep building. But when he started out, his kids weren't born yet. But he did it for them and with them in mind. That's the same way to reconcile it, the word you used, what you read in Colossians, with the idea of prolepsis.
Yes, I don't see that works within the context.
Read it again with what I just said in mind.
I know, but where do I get that idea?
It's in Scripture. Yahweh says that I speak of things that are not yet.
I understand that, but why would that be relevant to Colossians? See, what you're doing is you're taking a verse that has a specific type of framework, and then you're applying it to all verses across the texts. And I don't know that that's an appropriate method of hermeneutics.
Maybe then for me, if you would read it again, then maybe I can stop where.
So it says he is the image. He is the image of the unseen God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So something that's born didn't always exist, did it?
Again, see, now you're applying a literalism to the text, whereas before you're using this metaphoric or symbolic representation of how to exegete.
There's many ways in which these concepts.
So I'm going to use the specific, direct word in its context. The firstborn of all creation. For in him all things dwell. So if he's firstborn of all creation, he's the first thing that's brought into existence before all creation. Creation doesn't exist before him.
He was the firstborn from the point of creation that he would. Okay, Yeshua.
Again, that's what I'm saying is I don't think your hermeneutics work because.
No, if
you're going to apply a literalist definition to some things, but not to others, and then kind of selectively choose.
I'm not doing that, though. I could see why you might think that, but that's not at all what
I think that because it looks like that's what you're doing, Shelley.
Because here we go. You're coming from a very traditional Christian.
No, I'm not. I'm coming from a Latter-day Saint perspective. I don't have a traditional Christian.
Which is
no, we don't. We don't hold to a lot of traditional Christian values. No.
We don't hold that Jesus was created either.
Yes, I know you don't.
Right.
But he
the thing is
was
here.
created.
Okay, so here's
okay.
He had a beginning. Let me ask you gentlemen a question. Okay, in John 17, I've already referenced that for something else. But in that high priestly prayer, he's asking the Father, because he clearly said that's what he's praying to. He was asking him to restore to him the glory
that he had before the world was.
Yes. Now that fits what you're saying, right?
Yes, that he asked for the glory that he had prior to the world being created. He had glory with the Father before, yes.
Was he a spiritual being?
He was at that time, yes.
Okay, so if he was a pre-existent, spiritual, supernatural, immortal, powerful being.
Yes.
Okay, and then he came into the world as a mortal human being, a baby who grew and grew in wisdom
Which
and everything.
Which is what it says, yeah.
Yep, and learned obedience and all that. Let me ask you a question then. If he was praying that the Father would restore to him to that glorious, grand existence, the grandeur that he had with the Father in the beginning, why was he not restored as he asked? Did the Father gyp his Son? Because after he was resurrected, I don't want to, let me finish this if I may, please. I know I talk too much, but my brain gets going too fast sometimes. This is after he was resurrected, and this was the time when he appeared just out of nowhere in the midst of the apostles. And they were frightened, and he said, don't be frightened, because they thought that he was a spirit, and he said, God is a spirit.
No, he doesn't say that.
Yes, well, I can give you the reference if you'd like.
God is spirit.
God is spirit. And that's in John 4, and then if you look back in John 3.
So God is spirit. He is
God
a spirit being.
Yes. But
if you want to call it substance, his immortality.
He doesn't say he's a spirit. He says he's spirit, and it's important because it has reference to John chapter 3.
God is spirit. And that word
yes.
in here in the Greek, that would be not ruach, pneuma. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's not something that has a substance like we're made of.
No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work in the context of John. Because he says in John 3, when he's talking to Nicodemus, what is born of flesh is flesh, and what is born of spirit is spirit. Talking about being reborn and being spiritually changed.
Right, which is what will happen at Yeshua's return.
So what if you use the literalistic idea that you're imposing on John 4, what happens is that Jesus is telling the woman thereafter that in order to worship God, she has to remove her physical body.
No. He
says God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not telling that woman to remove her body and to become a spiritual being. He's telling her that God is spiritual.
Yes, and he is also a spirit being.
Except it doesn't say that. That's not what it's saying.
Because it's established through many places in Scripture.
Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, God is represented as anthropomorphic. He's not represented as some kind of a spiritual amorphous entity as modern Christianity kind of conveys.
God is a spiritual being because he cannot die.
He is a spiritual, yes, he is a spiritual being, but he is not a spirit in the sense that is his substance.
How does it say then in Scripture that in him we live and move and have our being?
Because God's glory sustains existence, which is what Colossians 1:16 is saying that. 1:15 and 16.
It doesn't say that it's his glory though. It says that in him,
Yes, in him.
Not his spirit. In him we live and move and have our being. He fills everything.
Okay, again, Shelley, again, you've got to be careful because you are being literal and figurative, and you're doing so to make the text become relatively meaningless. So
it sounds that way.
If it says in him we live and move and have our being, is he literally saying I have to be inside of God in order to live and move and have my being?
We already are in him, so to speak. If his presence and his ability to carry out his power and his will exists everywhere in the universe, then that to me isn't a being that has one central location in all of the universe.
Yeah, but then it says of Jesus in Hebrews, he is the reflection of God's glory, the exact imprint of God's very being.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the resurrected Christ.
Let me ask you what you think that means.
I think it means exactly that. He is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being.
Okay.
And when he says to Philip in John 14, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. It is because they are identical in characteristic and physical appearance.
When it says that there's a mystery, okay?
What
great
mystery?
Is the mystery.
What mystery?
Great is the mystery. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What mystery is there in those verses, though?
I'm going to explain that. This is where I'm going now.
Again, Shelley, let me kind of clarify a little bit of how I understand the scriptures, and Allen can certainly interject here, but the scriptures are not written especially not the New Testament, as a singular volume of texts that are intended to interpret one another.
They're all based on the Tanakh.
No, each author is trying to convey their own message. And they are not doing so with the expectation. So John is not writing the Gospel of John with the expectation that you also have Paul's letter to the Colossians. He's not doing that. He's writing his narrative in order to convey the message that he's conveying. And he's also doing so in Greek, and largely to, and Paul, for example, is writing to Gentile converts.
In other words, he's saying independent of any other
Well, Paul isn't necessarily writing, except maybe in the case of the Epistle to the Romans, he's not writing to Israelite converts to his way. He's writing to people who may be completely and entirely unfamiliar with the Tanakh.
Right, yes.
So how could he be referencing that with the expectation that they fully understand all of the intricacies and concepts contained therein?
Because, going back to Acts 15 with the Jerusalem Council, because these were people that from the time that they came in...
No, that's the Jerusalem Council referring specifically to apostles who are of the house of Israel, specifically.
No.
I'm talking about Paul's writings.
Yeah, I know. But you were asking how that they were supposed to understand these things, that they were not familiar with the Tanakh. It's because they were hearing Moses read every Sabbath in the temple or the synagogue. And they would have all day long that they would discuss Torah. They would discuss what was being read that day of Moses. And this is how they were building the foundation of their understanding of the Tanakh.
Okay.
Although they were proselytes that lived in Rome.
So, but again, that doesn't really respond to the fact that Paul is writing letters prior to the Jerusalem Council to Greeks who don't have access.
Paul came along quite a bit later.
No, Paul is actually one of the earliest writers of any New Testament document. Either 1 Thessalonians or Galatians are probably the first text written in the New Testament.
These might be the earliest extant documents that we have.
I know, but that would be the evidence we would have. You wouldn't make an argument based on, I think these are earlier texts. You'd have to have some evidence for that.
I do.
Okay. Have you written an article on that to examine?
No, I could though. Because it's right in Scripture.
Well, it wouldn't be right in Scripture.
No, Paul says so himself.
I understand that you're claiming that the text itself can't support the age of the text, because here's the issue: is that if Paul writes a letter, right, we actually have to physically have something substantial to identify the letter. Now, there's a couple of different ways that documents can be examined for their ancientness or when they were dated, but one of them is they're actually dated. There's actually a date on the document.
That's not what I'm referring to, though. Paul says that he was an apostle who came out of time, out of sync with the other apostles.
Yes, speaking of the fact that he wasn't in the Lord's earthly ministry, right?
He was called later, yes. And when he was called, he said that he was out in the wilderness, maybe, of Arabia for the space of 3 years. And he had not met any of the apostles yet at that point. He was called, and that's just where the Spirit led him. You're going out to Arabia, you're going to be there for 3 years. And when he did go back to Jerusalem, and I know he met Peter there and a few others of the apostles. So they were already called, they were already apostles before him.
I get that, but that's not responsive to what my statement is. I'm talking about the chronological, the identification of the chronology of when the New Testament texts were written.
Yes. So the books
You're talking about the chronology of the events, not when the texts are being written.
The books that were penned by Paul, I do understand, of those extant documents that we have, that's part of the context, that his were the earliest extant copies of these various epistles that he wrote.
And so
I believe that's true.
So I guess with your position, the reason you have an issue with the representations in the Book of Mormon is that in the Book of Mormon, Jesus is the pre-incarnate God of Israel. Is that what your issue is?
That's one.
Okay.
That's one. No, because he didn't pre-exist his conception.
And how do you know that?
Because when it was the fullness of time, Yeshua was born of a woman, born under the law. He talks about, again, we have a fundamental difference.
I understand that, because you're taking any passages that I could cite from the New Testament, at least, to support the opposite conclusion. You're just interpreting those away. You're not taking them at face value.
Yeshua is at present still. When he was resurrected, he was not restored to the existence that he had before.
He was super exalted, which is what Philippians 2 says.
Isn't that all I'm talking about, though? Of course, he definitely is that.
Yes.
And he's deserving of that, and of course, Scripture does say that, so that's indisputable. I don't dispute that.
So how do you...
Go ahead.
So how do you interpret, then, like John 1?
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, etc., etc.
Right.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, how was everything made that was made? Tell me.
It was brought into an organized state. It was chaotic, and then it was organized.
How did it happen, though? How did it happen?
I don't know by what method God organizes existing matter and creates order out of chaos. I have no idea how that works.
Okay. In the very first few verses of John's Gospel, when these verses that you're referring to, twice he refers his readers in that Gospel back to the beginning. And of course, in Greek, it would be Genesis. That's the word that means beginnings there.
Right.
In Hebrew, it's Bereshit. So when we go back to where he's pointing us to the beginning, everything that was made was spoken into existence, and there you have the Word.
I don't think that is sound exegesis.
Well, look at the definition of the word logos. It will tell you if you want to bring it up on this. if you want to bring it in on your phone.
Alan, what did you say?
Yeah. Look at the definitions for the word made and how that's used.
Everything that was made was spoken. That's how it was made. It was spoken into existence. And God said,
right.
And these things that he said happened. They came into being. They came together, as I think it was Travis a minute ago that was saying
right,
that he started
I understand,
creating order and disorder.
Yeah, but the Genesis texts in Genesis 1 and 2, and maybe Alan could speak more to this, the Genesis texts in 1 and 2 are not talking about creation out of nothing. They're not talking about speaking things into existence that didn't exist. It's talking about
all things were made that were made.
Yes, but made is an organizational understanding, not created out of nothing. The idea of a creation out of nothing is not a biblical concept.
Well, I must disagree with that.
Okay.
How did anything exist if it didn't exist?
Because it just existed in some other state.
How did it get into that? How did it get into that state then? How did anything first exist?
Well, God
in any state that you want to call.
God
You
facilitates.
want to ask the question of God, though.
Yeah.
It leads you to the same philosophical issue.
Everything had to have had a beginning, except there's one that has no beginning and has no end, and that is the Father alone. His Son now was not restored to the glorious, grand, immortal, supernatural, spiritual existence that he had in the beginning when he was referring to in John 17. No, he now says God, I'm not one for semantics. I'm pretty simple because...
And Shelley, I would disagree with that. I think that you've used significant semantic arguments.
We're getting into concepts that a child could not understand.
I'm sorry?
Way over a child's head.
I understand that, but what you're, again, in some of your responses, you have provided concepts that would be over a child's head, and they would not understand. Because the texts, if they're supposed to be perspicuous, which... Then they need to be understood. You have to be able to read them and just understand them. But if you're saying you have to have this complex methodology and perspective on the scriptures in order to interpret the verses contrary to what they seem to clearly indicate, then that doesn't sound like that's clear.
A child can understand future tense, though. He can understand that you can talk about things that are not yet as though they are because they're part of a plan and you're going to act on it. That's not difficult to a 5-year-old.
Again, no, I don't think that concept is, no. But I think that is not what's being conveyed.
Now is flesh and bones. Why is he flesh and bones? If he asked his father very clearly, restore to me what I had before, why is he now flesh and bone?
Again,
this is his existence that he's going to be in for eternity. Why is that?
I think that you're overlooking other verses that provide additional clarity to what John is stating in his text.
And some examples then that would lend greater clarity to why he's flesh and bone now, and why in the book of Revelation, the very first verse of the final book of the Bible, where it says the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him. Why? In John 3:12 does he say, him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which comes out of, from my God, in 4 times, in one verse. Over 65 years after he was resurrected to sit at the right hand of God, Yeshua is still saying he has a God. Why is that?
Right, because again, I think that you're reading John 17, and you're removing several concepts that are being conveyed in the high priestly prayer, because he is talking about glory that he currently has, glory that he's been given, glory that he will yet be given, and the ultimate glorification, as it indicates in Philippians 2. That he was super exalted, and if he's super exalted, then his glory is actually greater than the glory that he had before. So in his human state, reading here, in the beginning of the prayer...
That he existed before first, though.
What?
I mean literal, not as speaking ahead of what was going to be.
But again, John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being.
That's right, because he was the blueprint.
What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness. There was man sent from God, whose name was John. And it starts talking about that.
So did John pre-exist? He was sent.
Yes, I believe John did.
John pre-existed.
But in John 14 it says, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. So the Word that's being identified, that pre-existed, that lived with God, that was with God at the beginning of creation, that holds all things into order, as it says in Colossians, that sustains everything by the power of the Word. So Christ is the force by which all things were organized and are held into being.
That plan was, yes.
What plan?
This is the concept of Logos. In the beginning was the plan, and it was spoken into existence.
No, it's not saying that the Logos is not the plan. The Logos is specifically, and the Logos became flesh and lived among us. John 14.
Yes.
John 1:14.
But you look at the word Logos.
Yes, and I understand that the Logos is being identified by John as a designation for Jesus.
I'm so frustrated, I'm sorry, but I can only try to make myself clear. In the beginning, here's the difficulty I see. Now I'm speaking with Travis, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Travis. There's a very different, how can I say this? It's like, if you look at something, okay, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, he talks about seeing through a glass darkly, right? Okay, so...
What does that have to do with John?
I'm going there. That there's a way in which you are understanding Scripture, and if you're seeing it through, like, if we could say it like a certain film.
I'm not. I'm just trying to understand the words as they're indicated in the text.
Well,
unlike Allen, I don't read Hebrew and Greek, so I have to rely on translators.
I don't either. I don't.
I thought you did. Yeah, so you don't.
No. I will tell you right up front. No.
Oh, that's actually why I invited Allen, because I thought that you.
No, I don't. Well, there was a misunderstanding someplace. I've never even attempted to try to present myself that way. No, I do not know Greek. I do not know Hebrew. I know some words. I have a bit of a vocabulary in each. But to be able to be eloquent, to be proficient in the languages and read them that way, absolutely not, never.
Okay.
Mm-mm. So my understanding then, now that we've clarified that, is that, and again, you would disagree, and that's fine, but I'm telling you what I see, is that there's a certain way, a certain filter, so to speak, if I could put it that way, that you're understanding Scripture through.
Yeah, but I don't think that you have the authority.
I'm looking at it through a different filter.
Yeah, I don't think you have the authority to determine the filter. That's my issue. And I don't think that that's consistent with the biblical texts. The individuals don't rely on their own interpretations and their own lens or view or perspectives.
Right, because it says that Scripture is not subject to any person's private interpretation.
Except for that's why they had apostles and prophets.
The consistent, this is how I understand Scripture, is that the multiple ways in which we have Scripture penned, represented, they are still all harmonious with the overall message that began from Genesis and in the traditional canon ends in Revelation.
And that's a very Christian worldview. That is not something that ancient Israel would have applied as a meaning to those texts. I'm correct in that, Alan, right?
I just believe that there's one author of the entire Bible over the thousands of years in which it was just penned by different people.
But that can't be true that there's one author, because there's obviously not.
I disagree. I believe.
Well, who's the one author that wrote all of the texts?
God, who alone is the Father.
Well, no, God didn't write the Bible.
No, but you're making it. Okay, I'm going to be more clear. The one who authors something, if I'm in an iron lung, or if I'm blind, I can't write something, but I'm the author of the book, and I can tell someone who will pen it for me what to write.
So you believe that God dictated every word found in the Bible?
If you want to be that stringent about it, yes.
Well, I don't know. I'm asking. I'm just trying to understand.
No, I'm just saying too. That is my understanding. Is that the author of the entire book is one, and that is the Father alone, who I understand is Yahweh. He is the God and Father, the only one of Yeshua of Nazareth. And my understanding is, because it says that great is the mystery of godliness. Now, one of my majors in college was English, and I've always liked to read dictionaries since I was a kid. Godliness is a contraction for godlikeness.
I understand now, that, but that definition might not be relevant to when the translation you're reading, especially the KJV, was translated.
When it was the way it's written from Koine Greek, translated into English by KJV translators.
Which verse are you talking about?
I don't remember, but I could go find it.
What are you saying is the verse?
It says, great is the mystery of godliness. Okay? So if I'm like God, I'm not God. I'm like Him. And the mystery, this is what he was talking about that could be confounding. And that word mystery is mysterion. And we understand where we got mystery from. It means something that's hidden or secret. So the thing that was hidden to the world, the mystery, the secret that was hidden, that made Yeshua so like God, but not God, because again, it's godliness. It says that God was in Messiah, not that God was Messiah or Messiah was God, that He was in Messiah, reconciling the world to Himself. Yeshua, simply because He was this sinless vessel, was the one that finally the Father was able to dwell within. He said it too. Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me?
Yeah, but He couldn't have meant He's literally in the Father and His Father is literally in Him, and the apostles would not have understood it that way. As He's talking to Philip in John 14, He would not have understood it that way.
He was in the Father, and that their relationship was, I mean, it's like, where does one begin?
Again, we don't know.
One begin and the other end?
We don't know what they understood, because the author does not express anything other than what he expresses. So
Colossians
if you're going to...
2, that the fullness of God was in Him bodily.
Yes.
Everything.
But what does that mean? What does that mean, Shelley? What does that mean?
I think it means what it
Again,
says.
the fact that you think it means something is what you understand that it means. That's what you have to do, is interpret it. And that means that you are privately interpreting the Scriptures.
I'm not interpreting it. When it says that the Father is in Him, I'm not interpreting that.
Again, does that mean that God is literally inside of Jesus?
Absolutely.
Then how could they have understood that way? So where is God?
He was embodied in His Son.
Okay.
And if you look at Acts 2, verse 22, this was Peter's discourse on the day of Pentecost after the Spirit had been poured out, crying out to the crowd from the upper room. And he said, "You men of Israel, hear these words. Yeshua of Nazareth, a man, approved of God by miracles and wonders and signs which God did through Him as you yourselves also know. That's Peter. And in Acts 2:14, some verses ahead, well, actually it would have been 8 verses ahead, it says that Peter standing up, when they were accused of being drunken, it says Peter standing up with the 11, so we have now Matthias, who
I have to be doing something for a moment, so I'll be in and out, okay?
You what?
No, Alan's he's gonna be listening, but he won't be on the phone.
Oh, okay. Okay, he's still listening now?
Yeah, he is.
Okay. All right, good, Travis. Okay, thank you. So, in Acts 2:14, after they were accused of being drunk, and it says, and Peter standing up with the 11. So Matthias had replaced Judas, who had dropped the count to 11, but now we were back up to 12. And on the day that Yeshua was taken up, which is accounted in the final chapter of Luke, on the day that he was taken up, this is again the day in which it says that their understanding was open, that they would understand the scriptures, not some of them, the scriptures. And he had just cited all of the Tanakh. He mentioned Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim.
Again, there's no reason to understand that that's what that means either.
Why not?
Because the scriptures isn't especially in the first century, the scriptures are not a monolithic understanding amongst all Israelites. They don't all understand the same scriptures the same way. They don't even
all have the same one Tanakh?
No, they didn't.
Oh?
No, they didn't at
Are
this
you
time.
talking about things like Talmud, Mishnah,
No, I'm talking about the Hebrew scriptures as they're understood today as the Old Testament. They didn't have such a formulation. They just had piles of documents that they called the scriptures. They
had scrolls.
Yes, and they weren't they weren't all codices. They weren't all codified, and there wasn't a determined canon that was used by Israel. They had many texts that are not actually present in our Hebrew scriptures today, the Old Testament. They're not even there, that they still considered scriptures.
So you're talking about books that would be included in the Apocrypha?
Yes, there would be apocryphal text, for example, yes.
Sure. But the message amongst them all, there is going to be a cohesiveness. There is going to be a harmony amongst them all. Because if there isn't agreement between them all, how are we to know what is correct and what is not?
We have prophets. That's how we determine that. What we don't do is we don't go back and individually decide for ourselves what the texts mean. And the method by which God conveys the meaning and understanding of the texts to us is through an authorized oracle. For example, in Acts 2, the larger point is the person who's explaining it is Peter, who's authorized to do so.